EU's efforts to expedite deportation of irregular Gambian migrants, a comprehensive analysis. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we provide deep insights and critical analysis on the biggest issues shaping Africa today. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In this video, we're tackling the European Union's decision to speed up the deportation of irregular Gambian migrants under the new Migration and Asylum Pact. What are the implications for both Europe and Africa, and what does this mean for the future of migration policies? Stay with us as we break it all down. The European Union, EU, is intensifying its efforts to expedite the deportation of irregular Gambian migrants under the newly adopted Migration and Asylum Pact. This comprehensive policy aims to streamline deportation procedures, grant member states enhanced enforcement powers, and impose stricter sanctions on non-compliant countries. The EU's approach has sparked significant debate, with human rights organizations expressing concerns over potential violations of international law and the rights of affected individuals. Overview of the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact. Adopted in December 2023, the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact comprises 10 legislative acts designed to reform the EU's migration and asylum system. The core objectives include fostering greater responsibility, sharing, enhancing solidarity, and ensuring effective border management among member states. The pact introduces standardized procedures for processing asylum applications, expediting deportations, and establishing a common asylum system at the EU level. Key provisions affecting deportation procedures. The pact introduces several measures to expedite deportations. Enhanced enforcement powers. Member states are granted increased authority to enforce deportations, including the ability to detain individuals pending removal. Streamlined deportation processes. The procedures for deporting illegal migrants are simplified to reduce delays and administrative burdens. Limited appeal rights. The ability of affected migrants to appeal deportation decisions is restricted, aiming to expedite the removal process. Stricter sanctions for non-compliance. Countries that fail to cooperate with deportation efforts face stricter sanctions, which can be either comprehensive or selective. Implications for the Gambia. The Gambia, a country with a significant diaspora in Europe, is directly impacted by these changes. In 2021, the Gambia was among the first countries sanctioned by the EU for uncooperative conduct regarding the return of its nationals. The new pact's provisions are expected to intensify pressure on the Gambia to accept the return of its citizens, potentially leading to increased deportations. Human rights concerns. Human rights organizations have expressed deep concerns about the potential for the new policies to violate international law and the rights of migrants. Over 90 organizations have called on the EU to reject the plan, citing fears of increased human rights violations at Europe's borders. Africa-wide comparison. The EU's approach to deportations is part of a broader trend in Europe towards stricter migration policies. For instance, Germany's recent political discussions have centered on migration, with the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, advocating for stricter migration controls and reforms in asylum law. Similarly, Italy has implemented measures such as setting up external camps for asylum procedures, a strategy that is attracting interest from other EU nations. Forward-looking approach. Looking ahead, the EU plans to implement the new migration policies by 2026. The European Commission has adopted a common implementation plan to guide the application of the new rules. The EU is also exploring innovative solutions, such as establishing return hubs outside Europe and outsourcing asylum procedures to manage migration more effectively. The EU's efforts to expedite the deportation of irregular Gambian migrants reflect a broader shift towards stricter migration policies within the Union. While these measures aim to enhance border security and streamline deportation processes, they also raise significant human rights concerns. The effectiveness and humanitarian impact of these policies will depend on their implementation and the EU's commitment to upholding international law and the rights of migrants. the role of technology in the deportation process. As part of its new pact, the EU is heavily relying on technology to facilitate the deportation process. Key tools like the European Travel Information and Authorization System, ETIAS, and the Return Case Management Systems, RCMS, are expected to play pivotal roles in streamlining operations. ETS will enable authorities to monitor and track the movement of migrants entering and exiting the EU, improving border control and enabling faster identification of undocumented migrants. Meanwhile, RCMS is designed to support member states in managing deportation cases efficiently, ensuring that decisions are implemented swiftly and in compliance with the newly established procedures. While these technologies promise to increase operational efficiency, they also raise concerns regarding the privacy and rights of migrants, particularly those who are subject to automated surveillance and profiling. The impact of migration on Gambian migrants and the broader African context. The Gambian diaspora in Europe has long been a subject of debate, with many Gambia-born individuals seeking asylum in European countries due to economic hardships, political instability, and social challenges back home. However, the new EU regulations are set to target a significant number of Gambian migrants, as the country has a notably large presence in Europe compared to its population size. For many of these individuals, the EU represents a pathway to better opportunities, but their legal status often remains precarious. Under the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact, deportations will become more stringent, with fewer opportunities for asylum seekers to remain within the EU's borders. This situation must be viewed in the broader context of African migration trends. Throughout the continent, migration patterns are heavily influenced by political, economic, and environmental factors. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including the Gambia, often experience high rates of outmigration due to factors such as poverty, unemployment, and climate change. For example, over the last decade, the number of African migrants heading to Europe has steadily increased, particularly as young people seek better futures abroad. These migrants often face perilous journeys, relying on smugglers and risking their lives to reach European shores. The EU's increased focus on controlling migration and expediting deportations highlights a critical tension between humanitarian responsibilities and the EU's desire to secure its borders. Lessons from other African countries. The situation faced by Gambian migrants is not unique. Other African countries, particularly those with high migration rates to Europe, have also had to navigate complex relations with the EU regarding deportation and migration management. For instance, Morocco has faced similar challenges in recent years, particularly regarding migrants attempting to cross into Spain. The European Union has worked closely with Morocco to curb irregular migration, with financial incentives tied to Morocco's cooperation in the form of economic aid and assistance in border control. Similarly, Niger, one of Africa's primary transit points for migrants traveling through the Sahel, has had to contend with its role in managing migration under EU agreements. These countries have often been subject to pressure from the EU to strengthen their border security measures, resulting in strained relations between them and the EU, particularly regarding the treatment of migrants and the return process. The key takeaway from these examples is that the EU's approach to migration management heavily relies on third-party countries in Africa to enforce its policies. While such agreements offer financial incentives and diplomatic leverage, they also often place undue burden on these African nations to manage migration flows that stem from their own internal challenges. Furthermore, human rights concerns frequently arise, as the cooperation between the EU and these countries does not always ensure that migrants are treated fairly or in accordance with international norms. Gambia's response to the EU's new migration policy. The Gambian government's response to the EU's new Migration and Asylum Pact is critical, as it will determine the level of cooperation or resistance from the Gambia in handling deportation cases. As previously mentioned, the Gambia was sanctioned in 2021 for not adequately assisting with the return of its nationals. This situation has led to heightened diplomatic tensions between the Gambia and the EU. The government's position on the new policies will likely reflect its internal political dynamics, including the ruling party's stance on international relations and its ability to manage domestic public opinion regarding the treatment of migrants abroad. For the Gambia, the deportation of its citizens from Europe poses several challenges. Many deportees return to a country struggling with high unemployment rates, limited opportunities, and a lack of infrastructure to support reintegration. Additionally, the psychological impact of deportation on individuals who have lived in Europe for extended periods cannot be ignored. These individuals, who have often come to view Europe as their home, may find it difficult to adjust to life back in the Gambia, exacerbating existing socio-economic challenges. The Gambian government may attempt to negotiate more favorable terms for its nationals, advocating for better reintegration programs and seeking assurances from the EU that deportations will be carried out humanely. However, given the political and economic leverage the EU holds, the Gambia will likely face significant pressure to comply with the new deportation procedures. Looking ahead, striking a balance between security and human rights. As the EU continues to refine its Migration and Asylum Pact, the central question will remain: how can the EU strike a balance between tightening security measures and upholding its human rights obligations? The ability of member states to enforce deportations more efficiently while respecting the rights of migrants will be crucial. Human rights organizations are closely monitoring the situation, with many calling for greater transparency, accountability, and safeguards for the rights of deported individuals. The use of technology such as ETIAS and RCMS must be carefully managed to prevent violations of privacy and ensure that deportations are carried out fairly. Furthermore, the EU must be mindful of its relationships with third-party countries like the Gambia. Diplomatic tensions and the risk of pushing migrants into further vulnerability should not be underestimated. As the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact unfolds, it will be essential for both African governments and European authorities to ensure that cooperation on migration management does not come at the cost of human dignity. As we continue to monitor developments, the EU's approach to migration is evolving, but it remains to be seen how effectively it will balance its security concerns with the fundamental rights of individuals. Impact on the broader African diaspora in Europe. The EU's focus on deporting irregular migrants, particularly from the Gambia, could have ripple effects across the broader African diaspora in Europe. Many African migrants in Europe, whether from the Gambia, Nigeria, or elsewhere, have faced uncertainty regarding their legal status due to the region's tightening immigration policies. This uncertainty has caused anxiety among communities that have settled in Europe, contributing to social tensions and a sense of exclusion among migrant populations. In countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Spain, large African diasporas face the constant threat of deportation, even as they have become integral parts of their societies. The new EU migration policies could exacerbate these feelings of marginalization, particularly as it becomes harder for migrants to challenge deportation orders. For many, the loss of the right to appeal could lead to an overwhelming sense of insecurity, further complicating their ability to integrate into European society. Moreover, the emphasis on deportations could deepen the stigmatization of African migrants as undesirable in the eyes of the general public. While political rhetoric in some EU countries increasingly frames immigration as a threat, the situation faced by these migrants often contradicts that narrative, as many African nationals contribute economically and culturally to the countries they reside in. The loss of access to legal protections and the fear of deportation may push many into precarious living conditions, which could, in turn, fuel more anti-immigrant sentiments. EU's legal and ethical challenges. As the EU implements the Migration and Asylum Pact, it will face significant legal and ethical challenges. European laws, including those enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights, provide certain protections for migrants, including the right to fair treatment, protection from inhumane or degrading treatment, and the right to appeal decisions made by immigration authorities. Restricting the ability of migrants to appeal deportation decisions or detaining them in conditions that do not meet international standards could be in violation of these fundamental rights. human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have voiced concerns that the expedited deportation process may lead to violations of the principle of non-refoulement, which prohibits the return of individuals to countries where they risk facing torture or inhumane treatment. While the EU argues that its new measures are aimed at controlling irregular migration and reducing the exploitation of migrants by smugglers, the potential for abuse and mistreatment is a serious concern. As the legal frameworks within the EU evolve, pressure will mount on both the European Commission and member states to ensure that deportation procedures remain in line with international human rights standards. This will require not only robust oversight mechanisms, but also a willingness to engage with African countries in a way that acknowledges the dignity and rights of migrants, regardless of their legal status. The role of civil society and international organizations. Civil society groups have been at the forefront of challenging the EU's approach to migration. More than 90 organizations, including migrant rights groups, have condemned the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact, urging the European Commission to reject it on the grounds that it could lead to an erosion of human rights protections. These groups argue that the EU should prioritize more sustainable solutions for migration, such as creating legal pathways for migration and improving integration policies for migrants already within the EU. International organizations such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, have also raised concerns. The UNHCR emphasizes the need for a balanced approach to migration, one that ensures migrants' rights are upheld while addressing the underlying causes of migration, such as conflict, poverty, and climate change. The EU's current approach has been criticized for focusing predominantly on enforcement and deportation, without offering sufficient support for the integration of migrants who are legally allowed to stay or providing opportunities for those who wish to remain. These civil society and international voices will likely continue to play a key role in shaping the discourse around migration in Europe, advocating for policies that are both humane and effective in addressing the root causes of migration from Africa and other regions. Potential alternatives to deportation. Exploring long-term solutions. While the EU has made it clear that it intends to expedite deportations, there are alternative approaches to managing migration that could lead to better outcomes for both Europe and Africa. One such alternative is to focus on creating more legal pathways for migration, allowing migrants to enter Europe through regular channels rather than risking their lives through illegal means. Expanding work and student visa programs, as well as providing humanitarian protection for individuals fleeing conflict or persecution, could help reduce irregular migration while ensuring that those who need protection are able to find safety. Another approach could involve strengthening bilateral and multilateral agreements between African countries and EU member states. Such agreements could focus on areas such as education, job creation, and sustainable development, which would address some of the root causes of migration from Africa. By creating opportunities for young people in Africa to build their futures at home, migration flows to Europe could decrease, thus reducing the pressure on EU member states to deal with irregular migration. Furthermore, addressing the exploitation of migrants by smugglers requires stronger international cooperation. Many African migrants seeking to reach Europe are often preyed upon by human traffickers and smugglers who offer dangerous and costly routes to Europe. Efforts to crack down on smuggling networks and provide more safe, regulated migration options could reduce the numbers of people undertaking dangerous journeys, while also offering migrants a safer and more dignified path to their destinations. The future of EU-Africa relations. The new EU Migration and Asylum Pact underscores the growing importance of EU-Africa relations in the context of migration. As Africa continues to face demographic pressures, political instability, and economic challenges, migration will likely remain a central issue in the relationship between the two regions. While deportations may provide a short-term solution to the migration challenge, they are unlikely to address the long-term causes of migration from Africa. As such, the future of EU-Africa relations will require a more comprehensive approach to migration. one that includes efforts to address the structural factors driving people to leave their home countries. The EU and African leaders must engage in meaningful dialogue to develop solutions that benefit both regions, ensuring that migration is managed in a way that respects the rights and dignity of all individuals. Looking ahead, there is hope that the EU can evolve its migration policies to be more inclusive and compassionate. The pressure from human rights organizations, civil society groups, and international bodies will continue to challenge the EU to develop migration frameworks that not only serve its own interests, but also contribute to the sustainable development and prosperity of African nations. The path to a fairer and more balanced migration policy will require cooperation, understanding, and a commitment to long-term solutions that address the root causes of migration. Regional cooperation on migration, the role of the African Union. In recent years, the African Union (AU) has increasingly recognized the importance of migration as both a challenge and an opportunity for the continent. Given the rising levels of migration from Africa to Europe, regional cooperation within Africa itself will be crucial in managing migration flows and addressing the root causes. The AU's Migration Policy Framework for Africa, MPFA, aims to create a comprehensive strategy to address migration in a way that promotes the rights of migrants, enhances opportunities for legal migration, and reduces irregular migration. One of the key aspects of the AU's approach is the promotion of intra-Africa migration. By fostering regional mobility, African countries can offer their citizens better opportunities within the continent itself, which could reduce the pressures that lead to migration to Europe. Policies that promote economic integration, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, could help create job opportunities within Africa, particularly for youth, who make up a large portion of those migrating. With Africa's population expected to grow significantly in the coming decades, the ability to harness the potential of its young workforce is essential for both economic growth and migration management. However, the AU faces challenges in coordinating migration policy across its 55 member states, which have different levels of development, political stability, and economic opportunities. For instance, countries like South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria are often the top destinations for African migrants, while others, such as Sudan and Mali, are major sources of outmigration due to conflict and economic hardship. Despite these differences, the AU continues to push for policies that promote the free movement of people across borders, an important step toward reducing irregular migration to Europe. EU-Africa migration partnerships, a complex dynamic. The EU has long pursued partnerships with African countries to manage migration, including through agreements on deportations, border control, and aid. These partnerships are often framed as mutually beneficial, with the EU providing financial support for development and border control in exchange for African countries' cooperation in managing migration. However, these agreements have been controversial, with critics arguing that they often prioritize European security interests at the expense of human rights and African development. For example, the EU has provided funding for the creation of detention centers and border enforcement infrastructure in countries like Libya, Niger, and Sudan. These measures are intended to prevent migrants from making the dangerous journey to Europe, but they have also been criticized for leading to human rights abuses, such as the detention of migrants in overcrowded and unsafe conditions. Moreover, many African countries view the EU's focus on border control as a way to shift responsibility for managing migration onto them, rather than addressing the structural factors that drive migration, such as poverty, conflict, and environmental degradation. The EU's attempts to strengthen its borders have led to a paradox. While migration flows to Europe have been reduced in some areas, the number of African migrants trapped in transit countries has increased. Many migrants find themselves stuck in places like Libya, unable to continue their journey or return home, facing exploitation by human traffickers and harsh detention conditions. This situation has led to calls for the EU to reconsider its migration policies and shift towards a more holistic approach that addresses the drivers of migration and provides greater protection for migrants rather than focusing solely on containment. The need for a global approach to migration management. Migration is a global phenomenon, and its complexities cannot be addressed by any one region alone. As the EU continues to grapple with the challenges of migration, it is essential that it works closely with the UN and other international organizations to develop a global approach to migration management. This includes upholding the rights of migrants, addressing the root causes of migration, and ensuring that deportations are carried out in a way that respects international law. The UN's Global Compact for Migration, adopted in 2018, provides a framework for international cooperation on migration. It emphasizes the need for comprehensive and rights-based approaches to migration, calling for more safe, orderly, and regular migration pathways. While not legally binding, the compact encourages states to cooperate on migration, share best practices, and work towards solutions that benefit both migrants and host countries. The EU's Migration and Asylum Pact could be aligned with these global goals by focusing on sustainable development, human rights protection, and reducing inequality rather than simply emphasizing border enforcement and deportation. A global approach to migration requires collaboration between all stakeholders, including governments, civil society, and migrants themselves. Migrants are often the most vulnerable group in migration debates, and their voices must be central in shaping migration policies. Listening to the needs and experiences of migrants, particularly those from the global south, will help ensure that migration policies are not only effective but also humane. The future of migration. Looking beyond the EU's current strategy. While the EU's new migration strategy focuses heavily on deportation and border control, the future of migration will likely demand more forward-thinking approaches. A key issue will be how European countries, and the EU as a whole, adapt to changing migration patterns in the coming decades. Climate change, conflict, and economic disparity are expected to lead to an increase in migration flows, not only from Africa but also from other regions such as the Middle East and Asia. The EU will need to prepare for this by investing in long-term solutions that go beyond enforcement and address the root causes of migration. One potential approach is to create more opportunities for circular migration. Circular migration allows migrants to move back and forth between their home countries and host countries, contributing to the economies of both. This type of migration could be particularly beneficial for African countries, where remittances from the diaspora are a crucial source of income. By creating legal migration pathways that allow migrants to work and study in Europe for limited periods, the EU could alleviate some of the pressures on irregular migration while providing tangible benefits to both European and African economies. Additionally, there is growing recognition of the importance of adaptation of climate change in migration management. As environmental changes such as droughts, floods, and desertification continue to affect African countries, more people may be forced to migrate within their own countries or across borders. The EU and African governments must work together to address the environmental factors that drive migration, ensuring that migrants are not left vulnerable or exposed to exploitation. The EU's Migration and Asylum Pact represents a critical moment in the ongoing debate about migration management. While the focus on deportation and border security reflects growing political pressures within Europe, it is important that the EU take a more comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes of migration and respects the rights of migrants. By engaging with African countries and international organizations, the EU can help build a more sustainable and humane migration system that benefits both migrants and host countries. The future of migration in Europe will depend on a collaborative, rights-based approach that fosters cooperation, dignity, and long-term solutions. Strengthening international cooperation, Africa and Europe, working together. As the EU moves towards more stringent migration controls, strengthening cooperation between African and European nations is more important than ever. Both regions face significant challenges related to migration, but they also share a vested interest in finding solutions that benefit all stakeholders. Migration, when managed effectively, can offer substantial economic, social, and cultural benefits. Therefore, building strong, collaborative relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals is essential to achieving sustainable migration management. One critical area for enhanced cooperation is in the realm of migration development. African nations must be empowered to manage migration flows more effectively, and this can be achieved by investing in the development of skills, infrastructure, and job creation programs that provide citizens with the opportunities to remain in their home countries. The EU's financial assistance, as well as technical support for African countries, will be crucial in helping them build the capacity to create such opportunities. By focusing on the root causes of migration, including economic inequality, lack of opportunities, and conflict, both regions can work toward reducing the pressures that push people to migrate irregularly. Furthermore, addressing the environmental dimensions of migration requires a shift in perspective from both regions. Climate change is expected to exacerbate displacement, with millions of Africans already being forced to migrate due to environmental pressures. The EU must collaborate with African governments to address climate adaptation strategies, particularly in vulnerable countries. The joint development of green technologies and sustainable agricultural practices can help mitigate the effects of climate change, ultimately reducing the need for forced migration. Initiatives like the EU's Green Deal could be a starting point for such cross-continental cooperation. Exploring the role of technology in managing migration. In addition to diplomacy and financial aid, technology plays a pivotal role in modernizing the management of migration. The European Union has increasingly invested in technology to monitor borders, track migrants, and streamline deportation processes. However, technology must be deployed with care to ensure it does not infringe on the rights of migrants or lead to discrimination. African countries are also investing in digital tools to improve migration management, whether using biometric systems, e-passports, or online migration databases. A more integrated use of technology could help manage the migration process in a more transparent, secure, and humane manner. Shared digital systems that facilitate information exchange between African and European nations could improve the efficiency of asylum applications, make deportation procedures smoother, and offer real-time updates on migrants' locations and status. Such initiatives could also contribute to safer migration channels by allowing migrants to be better informed about legal pathways and asylum processes before embarking on dangerous journeys. Furthermore, technologies that monitor migrant conditions, including detention centers and border zones, could help ensure that migrants are treated humanely and that international laws are upheld. However, it is crucial that any technology used in migration management is subjected to strong oversight to prevent abuses. Civil society groups and human rights organizations must be included in the discussions around the deployment of such technologies to ensure they are used responsibly and do not violate migrant privacy or exacerbate xenophobia. Potential for legal pathways and humanitarian response. While the EU's focus on deportations has dominated the migration discourse, there is a growing consensus that more needs to be done to create legal pathways for migration. The EU should take steps to ensure that migrants from Africa can legally enter European countries through work, education, or family reunification programs. Expanding access to humanitarian visas, student visas, and labor migration programs would allow migrants to come to Europe without resorting to illegal channels. Furthermore, these legal avenues would decrease the reliance on smugglers and reduce the vulnerability of migrants who may face exploitation on their journey. Offering opportunities for circular migration, where migrants can come to Europe for a set period and then return home, could be a win-win for both Africa and Europe. Circular migration programs allow migrants to build their careers or receive education in Europe, while contributing to their home countries through remittances or by acquiring skills that they can later use in their home countries. This model could provide African countries with a source of skilled labor without the long-term challenges associated with brain drain. For the EU, it would mean having a workforce that can fill labor shortages while reducing the pressure on asylum systems. Another important aspect of the legal migration discussion is the need for better protection for migrant workers. Migrants working in sectors such as agriculture, domestic work, and construction often face exploitation and lack of rights. The EU must ensure that labor laws protect migrant workers and that their human rights are respected both in the workplace and throughout their migration journey. Creating bilateral agreements with African countries focused on labor migration can help guarantee fair treatment for migrant workers and ensure that they are not subjected to abuse or exploitation. The role of African governments in shaping migration policy. African governments will need to play a larger role in shaping migration policies, both domestically and in their relations with the EU. While the EU has been an active player in influencing migration trends, African nations must have a stronger voice in advocating for policies that benefit their citizens. This includes pushing for the creation of legal migration pathways, better protection for their citizens abroad, and more investment in development programs that address the root causes of migration. Governments in African countries should also work together to create regional solutions to migration. As the African Union continues to promote the free movement of people within the continent, individual African nations should take steps to strengthen border management and asylum systems that respect migrants' rights. Furthermore, African countries can play a critical role in working with the EU to create frameworks for the safe return of migrants and ensure they are reintegrated successfully. This will require coordination between the EU and African governments to ensure that deportations are handled with dignity and returnees have the necessary support to rebuild their lives. A balanced and comprehensive approach to migration. The EU's current approach to migration, with its emphasis on deportation, enforcement, and border control, represents a shift towards a more restrictive and security-focused strategy. While these measures serve to curb irregular migration, they risk overlooking the broader, more complex realities of migration. As both African and European governments grapple with migration challenges, it is essential that a more balanced and comprehensive approach is pursued, one that addresses the root causes of migration, upholds the human rights of migrants, and provides more legal pathways for those seeking better opportunities. The future of migration management will depend on increased international cooperation, better use of technology, and the creation of sustainable, humane solutions that respect the dignity and rights of all migrants. With joint efforts, both Africa and Europe can build a future where migration benefits everyone, rather than being a source of division and hardship. Exploring alternative migration models, cooperation beyond borders. One of the most promising ways to reshape the migration debate is by exploring alternative migration models that emphasize cooperation beyond national borders. As the EU and African nations look for solutions that provide long-term benefits for both regions, more innovative approaches to migration management should be considered. These models would not only provide safety and dignity for migrants, but would also allow both Africa and Europe to address the challenges posed by irregular migration in a more sustainable and equitable way. One such model is the concept of regional migration hubs. These hubs could be established in African countries, where migrants can access services and legal pathways to migrate to Europe or other destinations. These hubs would be designed to facilitate safe migration, provide migrants with accurate information about their rights, and help with securing work permits, education visas, or humanitarian protection. The EU could collaborate with African governments and international organizations to fund and operate these centers, ensuring that migrants are not forced to rely on dangerous routes or exploitative smugglers. Regional migration hubs could help reduce the pressures on Mediterranean countries, where many migrants attempt to cross irregularly. By providing access to legal migration pathways closer to their countries of origin, such hubs could also encourage migrants to stay in the region longer, helping to reduce the burden on Europe's asylum systems. Such models also have the potential to bolster intra-Africa migration, creating a more integrated African labor market where people can move freely within the continent in search of opportunities. Moreover, Diaspora engagement is another important aspect of rethinking migration management. African diaspora communities in Europe and other parts of the world are a valuable resource for both African governments and host countries. Diaspora communities can play a pivotal role in economic development by investing in local businesses, transferring skills, and contributing to the social development of their countries of origin. In many instances, the diaspora provides crucial remittances that contribute significantly to poverty reduction and economic growth. By creating mechanisms that enable African migrants to contribute to their home country's development, both Africa and Europe can benefit. African governments should focus on engaging their diaspora populations by offering incentives for investment, encouraging return migration, and promoting opportunities for collaboration between African migrants abroad and their local communities. For the EU, this means recognizing the potential of the African diaspora as a development partner, rather than solely viewing them as a source of labor or as people who need to be managed and deported. The need for comprehensive immigration reforms in the EU. While Africa is a key partner in managing migration, the EU must also take serious steps to reform its own immigration policies to ensure a more inclusive approach. The EU's immigration system is currently based on a rigid framework that is not flexible enough to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing global migration landscape. Current policies focus heavily on enforcement and border control, and while these measures are important, they do not sufficiently address the underlying causes of migration or the needs of migrants themselves. There is a growing call for the EU to create a more flexible and compassionate immigration system that balances security with human rights protection. The European Commission and EU member states should work to modernize asylum procedures, streamline visa systems, and reduce barriers to legal migration. Creating clear and transparent asylum processes that prioritize human dignity is crucial for ensuring that those seeking refuge are not left in precarious or harmful situations. Moreover, the EU should revisit its policies on temporary protection status and family reunification. By ensuring that migrants and asylum seekers have access to family reunification opportunities, the EU can help facilitate their integration and reduce social isolation. Family reunification is often one of the most significant factors in a migrant's ability to integrate successfully into society. By offering more humane solutions like these, the EU can work toward an immigration policy that better meets the needs of both migrants and host countries. Integration policies, long-term solutions for migrants in Europe. While much of the current debate around migration in the EU focuses on border control and deportation, integration should also be seen as a fundamental aspect of any migration strategy. Integration policies that focus on employment, education, and social inclusion are crucial for ensuring that migrants who are allowed to stay in the EU can thrive and contribute to society. However, successful integration requires efforts from both migrants and the host country. In many European countries, migrants face significant barriers to integration, including language obstacles, discrimination, and lack of access to social services. Integration policies must go beyond simply granting migrants the right to stay. They should also provide support for their participation in the labor market, access to education, and opportunities to engage in social and cultural life. These efforts should focus on reducing inequality, providing access to affordable housing, and promoting social cohesion within communities. Successful integration is mutually beneficial. It allows migrants to contribute to the economy, enriches the host society culturally, and helps migrants build a stable future for themselves and their families. Furthermore, strong integration policies can help prevent the development of parallel societies or communities that are marginalized and disconnected from mainstream society. Countries such as Germany and Sweden have made strides in integration, but more work is needed across the EU. A shift toward inclusive migration policies will ensure that migrants are not left behind and their potential is fully realized. The EU must continue to invest in integration programs that offer education, language training, and employment opportunities, while also promoting the importance of multiculturalism and tolerance. Charting a path forward for EU-Africa migration cooperation. The challenge of managing migration is complex, but it is not insurmountable. The EU's approach to migration, including deportation measures, must be balanced with a commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of migrants. As Europe faces growing migration flows from Africa and beyond, it must recognize the need for a more comprehensive, humane approach to migration that addresses both the root causes of migration and the integration of migrants within host societies. Ultimately, a solution to the migration challenge will require cooperation between Europe, Africa, and international organizations. By working together, Africa and Europe can create a future where migration is viewed as a potential source of prosperity and cultural exchange, rather than a threat to security or economic stability. However, this vision can only be realized through a concerted effort to reshape policies, enhance collaboration, and prioritize the welfare of migrants while ensuring that both continents are able to respond effectively to the challenges and opportunities that migration presents. As we look ahead, the global community must continue to seek ways to manage migration that promote mutual respect, shared prosperity, and a recognition of the inherent dignity of every individual. By rethinking our approach to migration, we can help build a future where borders are not barriers to opportunity, but bridges to a better, more connected world. The role of the private sector in migration management. While government policies and international agreements are central to managing migration, the private sector also plays a critical role in facilitating both legal migration pathways and the integration of migrants. Companies and businesses in Europe and Africa can contribute to the success of migration policies by supporting job creation, skill development, and investment in migrant integration programs. The private sector can help address the skills gap in both African and European labor markets by providing opportunities for workforce development and apprenticeships for migrants. Many sectors in Europe, such as technology, healthcare, and construction, are facing shortages of skilled workers, and migrants can fill these gaps. By creating pathways for legal migration to fill these positions, businesses in Europe can meet labor market demands while providing migrants with sustainable opportunities. On the African side, collaboration with European businesses can help promote local economic development and reduce the economic pressures that drive migration. European companies can play a role in fostering investment in African infrastructure, agriculture, and manufacturing sectors, creating opportunities for youth and reducing the need for migration in the first place. By expanding opportunities for entrepreneurship, supporting startup ecosystems, and promoting sustainable local businesses, the private sector can also contribute to creating conditions that allow young Africans to build their futures at home rather than seeking opportunities abroad. Moreover, corporate social responsibility, CSR initiatives, can directly impact the lives of migrants by funding integration programs, language training, and community building initiatives that help migrants integrate smoothly into their new environments. When businesses invest in such initiatives, they help foster social cohesion and reduce tensions that can arise between local populations and migrants, particularly in areas with high levels of immigration. Migration and the global supply chain. The global supply chain is intrinsically linked to migration flows, as many industries rely on migrant labor for manufacturing, agriculture, and service provision. The global demand for low-cost labor and the international nature of trade make migration a key factor in sustaining the flow of goods and services across borders. As global economies become increasingly interconnected, migration must be recognized as a driver of economic activity, rather than just a challenge to be managed. In this context, both Europe and Africa must look at migration through the lens of supply chain sustainability. For example, Europe's agriculture and hospitality sectors depend on migrant workers, many of whom are employed in low-wage jobs that are often unstable and lack legal protections. Strengthening labor rights for these workers and ensuring fair wages can create a more resilient supply chain while also enhancing the integration and well-being of migrants. By supporting ethical labor standards, Businesses in both regions can help combat the exploitation of migrants while ensuring that they are treated with dignity and respect in the workplace. Similarly, the African continent's role in global supply chains has grown significantly in recent years. As Africa becomes a key source of raw materials and finished products for the global market, ensuring that African workers are paid fairly and work under decent conditions becomes paramount. As migration is often driven by the search for better job opportunities, ensuring that these opportunities exist within Africa itself through corporate partnerships could reduce the need for people to migrate out of economic necessity. This can be achieved through programs that incentivize businesses to create employment opportunities locally, thereby reducing the pressures that lead to irregular migration. Addressing xenophobia and social tensions in host countries. Migration often brings new cultural and social dynamics to host countries. While diversity can lead to enriched societies, it can also trigger social tensions, particularly in areas where there is resistance to integration. In some European countries, xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment have been on the rise, fueled by economic insecurity, fear of cultural dilution, and political rhetoric that associates migration with crime or job loss. These sentiments can negatively impact migrants, leading to discrimination, social exclusion, and violence. To address these challenges, host countries must make concerted efforts to promote social inclusion and tolerance. Education plays a key role in breaking down stereotypes and building a more accepting society. By integrating discussions on cultural diversity, multiculturalism, and the contributions of migrants into school curriculums, future generations can be better equipped to appreciate the value of immigration and reduce fear and prejudice. In addition to formal education, community-based initiatives are crucial in fostering understanding between migrants and host populations. Cultural exchange programs, community dialogues, and collaborative events that bring together local residents and migrants can help build bridges and promote mutual respect. Governments, civil society groups, and private organizations must work together to create a welcoming environment where migrants feel accepted, valued, and empowered to contribute to society. The private sector can also play a key role here by supporting initiatives that promote social cohesion, investing in programs that encourage interaction between migrants and local populations, and offering platforms for dialogue. This could involve businesses sponsoring integration events, funding educational programs, or creating workplace initiatives that encourage diversity and inclusion. The changing demographics of migration. As the world's demographics change, so too does the nature of migration. The global population is aging, particularly in Europe, where many countries are facing declining birth rates and an increasing proportion of elderly citizens. This demographic shift presents both challenges and opportunities for migration. On the one hand, aging populations mean fewer workers to support the economy, especially in sectors like healthcare and social services. On the other hand, younger migrant populations can fill labor shortages, contribute to economic growth, and help sustain public services. The EU, therefore, faces the challenge of creating a migration strategy that considers both the economic needs of aging societies and the humanitarian aspects of migration. This requires recognition that migration will increasingly be essential to maintaining economic stability and supporting an aging population. Rather than viewing migrants primarily as a burden, the EU must frame migration as a solution to demographic challenges. This means ensuring that migrants have access to training, career advancement opportunities, and social benefits to fully integrate into the labor market. In Africa, migration trends will also evolve in response to shifting demographic dynamics. As the population grows, the need for employment, education, and social services will intensify. At the same time, the increasing number of young people migrating will continue to put pressure on both African governments and the EU to find solutions that provide opportunities for youth and prevent brain drain. Both Africa and Europe must work together to develop strategies that will benefit young people both in their home countries and abroad. A collaborative and forward-looking migration framework. The future of migration management requires a bold shift towards more comprehensive, forward-looking policies that recognize the complex factors driving migration while upholding the dignity and rights of migrants. By engaging in a collaborative effort between African countries, European governments, international organizations, the private sector, and civil society, both regions can begin to shape a migration framework that benefits everyone involved. This approach must go beyond enforcement and deportation, focusing instead on creating legal pathways, sustainable economic opportunities, and social inclusion. By working together to build strong, resilient societies, Europe and Africa can create a future in which migration is not a crisis to be managed, but a catalyst for shared prosperity and global cooperation. With a focus on innovation, inclusivity, and mutual respect, the global community can navigate the challenges of migration and shape a future where migration serves as a tool for opportunity, growth, and global unity. The role of international organizations in shaping migration policy. The role of international organizations in shaping migration policies cannot be overstated. Organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and the International Labor Organization, ILO, have long been at the forefront of advocating for migrant rights, ensuring humane treatment, and supporting the development of policies that are equitable and based on international law. These organizations can serve as mediators and facilitators between governments, ensuring that the rights of migrants are protected even as countries pursue stricter policies. The UNHCR's Global Compact on Refugees, for example, sets out a framework for the international community to share the responsibility of refugee protection and create opportunities for refugees to rebuild their lives. This aligns with the growing recognition that migration is not only a challenge, but also an opportunity for the global community to come together and create meaningful change. Through its partnership with the EU, UNHCR has worked on projects to support migrants in transit, ensure safe asylum procedures, and advocate for the inclusion of migrants in the host society's social systems. IOM also plays a significant role in migration management by supporting governments in developing policies that promote safe and orderly migration. It helps countries strengthen their capacities to manage migration flows, combats human trafficking, and supports migrants who are vulnerable to exploitation. The IOM's migrant protection and assistance programs help to ensure that migrants receive the support they need during their journey and after their arrival in a host country, reducing the risks associated with irregular migration. For African nations, regional organizations such as the African Union, AU, and Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, have begun to play a more prominent role in coordinating migration policy. The AU has prioritized the free movement of people within the continent, recognizing that migration within Africa is often an economic necessity. The AU's Agenda 2063, which aims to create a more integrated and prosperous continent, includes the promotion of Pan-African migration policies that allow for easier movement across borders. This approach could not only alleviate migration pressures on Europe, but also foster deeper cooperation between African nations, enhancing regional stability and growth. By aligning their efforts with international frameworks, both African and European countries can benefit from a multilateral approach to migration that is more effective and sustainable. Rather than working in isolation or competing to impose stricter measures, countries can engage in dialogue and build mutually beneficial partnerships that prioritize human rights, security, and socioeconomic development. Migration and education, building bridges for the future. Education is a powerful tool for bridge the gap between migration and integration. Access to education enables migrants to acquire the skills and knowledge necessary to thrive in their new environments, contributing to both their personal development and the development of host countries. European nations, facing demographic challenges and labor shortages, should recognize the importance of integrating migrants into their educational systems. One of the most effective ways to facilitate integration is through the provision of language courses and vocational training. Many migrants face significant barriers in accessing educational opportunities due to language barriers, cultural differences, or lack of formal qualifications. Host countries should ensure that educational systems are inclusive and cater to the diverse needs of migrant populations. By providing language courses that are accessible, affordable, and culturally relevant, host countries can give migrants the tools to integrate into society, find employment, and contribute to the economy. For African migrants, educational programs that focus on skills development and entrepreneurship can help empower them to contribute to their communities back home. By providing scholarships, financial support for studies, and pathways to higher education, both African and European governments can help build a generation of skilled, educated individuals who can bridge the gap between migration and development. The EU should also support educational exchange programs between African and European universities, offering opportunities for young people to gain international exposure, broaden their worldviews, and develop the skills needed to address global challenges. These programs could serve as a tool for strengthening ties between the two continents, creating a more informed and interconnected generation of leaders, entrepreneurs, and citizens. Incorporating global citizenship education into school curricula across both Europe and Africa would encourage understanding and empathy between cultures, fostering a sense of solidarity that transcends national borders. Through education, future generations can be prepared to address the complexities of migration, climate change, and economic inequality in a way that fosters cooperation, not division. Leveraging the role of technology in migration solutions. As technology continues to advance, it has the potential to play a transformative role in migration management. Data sharing, artificial intelligence, AI, and blockchain technology can be leveraged to make migration processes more efficient, transparent, and secure. With the right policies in place, technology can help to streamline asylum procedures, improve the management of migration flows, and ensure that migrants' rights are respected. For instance, AI-powered systems can be used to assess asylum applications more quickly, reducing backlogs, and ensuring that decisions are made fairly. Blockchain technology could be used to create secure and transparent records of migrant identities, making it easier for migrants to prove their legal status and access services without the risk of exploitation. Additionally, mobile technology can facilitate communication between migrants and authorities, providing a platform for migrants to access information about their rights, find legal assistance, or report abuses. However, it is crucial that the deployment of technology is done with the oversight of human rights organizations and civil society groups to prevent the abuse of data and ensure that migrants' privacy is protected. The EU and African governments must work together to ensure that technological solutions are deployed responsibly and equitably, without discriminating against certain migrant groups or making it more difficult for vulnerable individuals to access protections. Furthermore, technology can be used to monitor border zones, ensuring that migration processes are carried out safely and that migrants are not subjected to inhumane treatment. Advanced surveillance systems, when implemented with the right ethical safeguards, can help prevent trafficking, reduce fatalities during border crossings, and ensure that migration policies are enforced in a way that respects human rights. The path forward, a comprehensive migration strategy. As we move forward, migration management requires a comprehensive, multifaceted strategy. The path to a more sustainable, humane, and effective migration system lies in building partnerships between African and European countries, international organizations, and the private sector. Together, these entities can work to address the root causes of migration, reduce the vulnerabilities of migrants, and create a future where migration is managed in a way that benefits all parties involved. It is crucial that this strategy includes long-term solutions that go beyond enforcement and deportation. By investing in economic development, education, and social integration, countries can help address the pressures that lead to migration, while also ensuring that those who migrate are treated with dignity and respect. Ultimately, the goal should be to create a migration system that is just, fair, and inclusive, recognizing migration as a human reality that, when managed appropriately, can contribute to global stability, prosperity, and mutual understanding. This requires not only bold leadership and collaboration between Africa and Europe, but also a commitment to building a future where human rights, security, and development are central to the migration debate. By adopting a forward-looking, comprehensive approach to migration, the global community can ensure that migration becomes a force for good, fostering shared prosperity, cultural exchange, and lasting peace across the continents. Strengthening resilience, fostering a migration-ready Africa. As migration continues to shape the global landscape, African leaders must focus on building resilient economies, societies, and governance systems that are not only capable of managing migration flows, but are also proactive in turning these challenges into opportunities. A major priority should be the development of youth-focused policies, as young people represent the future of Africa and will make up a large proportion of migration flows. Ensuring that young Africans have access to education, skill-building programs, and employment opportunities within their own countries is essential to reducing the economic push factors that lead to migration. African leaders can work in tandem with the private sector, international partners, and civil society to invest in sustainable development projects that provide alternatives to migration. Investments in agriculture, green technologies, and infrastructure will help create job opportunities and reduce the economic disparity that fuels migration. Moreover, strengthening the rule of law and promoting good governance will not only improve political stability but also enhance the overall environment for sustainable development. Furthermore, African leaders must place greater emphasis on the free movement of people within the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, with its focus on enhancing intra-Africa trade, should be complemented by policies that facilitate labor mobility, by making it easier for Africans to travel, live, and work within their own continent. Leaders can reduce the reliance on migration to Europe and other regions. This regional mobility would benefit African economies by helping to address labor shortages and promote knowledge exchange, while also enhancing Africa's role in global economic networks. Advice to African leaders should embrace the opportunity to lead from the front on migration issues, not merely as passive participants in external policies, but as active advocates for solutions that benefit Africa's long-term development. By engaging with European counterparts in a constructive and forward-thinking manner, they can ensure that migration becomes a tool for economic and social development, not merely a challenge to be managed. A key recommendation for African leaders is to push for fairer migration agreements with the EU, focusing not just on enforcement and deportation, but on shared responsibilities that include investment in development and cooperation on legal migration pathways. Moreover, it is essential for African leaders to strengthen regional cooperation on migration and development, ensuring that African countries work together to create common migration frameworks that respect human rights, foster economic integration, and enhance opportunities for youth. By taking a unified approach, African nations can present a strong voice in global migration discussions, advocating for a system that recognizes the value of migration both within Africa and on the global stage. Summary of key messages. The EU's new migration policy presents both challenges and opportunities for both Europe and Africa. While Europe seeks to manage irregular migration through enforcement and deportations, it is essential to recognize that migration is not just a security issue, but a complex, multifaceted phenomenon driven by economic, political, and environmental factors. African leaders must take a more proactive approach to shaping migration policies, focusing on development, youth empowerment, regional cooperation, and human rights. The key to success lies in collaboration between African nations, Europe, international organizations, and the private sector. By investing in education, creating economic opportunities, and fostering social integration, both Africa and Europe can transform migration into a source of prosperity, cultural exchange, and shared growth. Finally, African leaders should prioritize internal development to create environments where young people are empowered with the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. This approach will reduce the pressures that drive migration, enhance Africa's economic and social fabric, and foster a more equitable, stable, and prosperous future for all Africans. Through bold, visionary leadership, Africa can reshape its role in the global migration landscape, ensuring that migration serves as a force for good, fostering opportunity, cooperation, and shared prosperity across continents. Thank you for joining the Bold African Voice, BAV, on this exploration of the EU's recent policy changes and their impact on African migration. We want to hear from you what you think about the EU's approach to migration and deportations. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions on Africa's place in the world. Until next time, keep raising your voice for a better tomorrow.